Welcome to Season 3 of the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm Matthew Green and I'm so grateful that you've joined me today. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you that have subscribed, listened and reviewed the episode. I really do appreciate you taking the time. James Nottingham is regarded by many as one of the most engaging and thought-provoking presenters in the world of education. He is the author of 10 books and developed the concept of the learning pit. Learning occurs when you step out of your comfort zone, and yet many people are hesitant to take the step for fear of making mistakes or revealing their weaknesses. That's when the learning pit helps, to encourage and reassure learners that taking risks, asking questions and trying new things can help them develop their abilities and deepen their understandings. In this wide-ranging interview, we talked about the importance of creating opportunities for cognitive conflict with your students, the role of metacognition and self-reflection, and the importance of adopting a growth mindset. I was left profoundly impacted by my conversation with James. He talked honestly about his experiences at school and why he found it so challenging. He reminded me of the primary role of teachers, and that's to connect and engage with our students. James is an incredible communicator, and I hope that you get as much out of this episode as I did. I truly believe this conversation with James can and will transform your teaching. James Nottingham, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's a delight to join you. Thanks for the invite.
You are more than welcome. Just a couple of rapid fire questions. I'm aware that it's coming up to midday over in the UK and it's a little bit late over here, so getting the blood pumping. What's the view out of your nearest window?
A garage, a pub and McDonald's.
Fantastic. What an eclectic mix of venues.
Yeah, that's just from the office window, yeah. So
lovely. Whereabouts are you phoning from in the UK?
So our office is in Alnwick in Northumberland. So Northumberland is the most northerly county in England. It's on the Scottish border. And if I were able to crane my neck out the window, I might be able to see Alnwick Castle, where the Duke of Northumberland still lives and lords it over us peasants.
Fantastic. I noticed just before you hit record that you're wearing shorts. So it's nice and sunny over in the UK.
No, not really. Although I think it might even hit double figures soon. No, from May to September, I just live in shorts. It's just optimism. That's what I call it.
Lovely.
Most people call it stupidity, but it's even got into 20 whole degrees centigrade this summer. So
that's a cool winter's day for us. So it's hard to. It's very hard to.
Yeah.
But quite possibly the most important question for our conversation. What's your coffee order when I can finally buy your coffee?
Oh, I love a double espresso macchiato, please.
Double espresso, no mucking around there, straight to the point.
No, let's get in there. Although pre-pandemic, my last trip to Oz, and I make about 3 trips there each year, and I was working with a school in Brizzy. And they asked me exactly that, what's your coffee order? And I said a double espresso macchiato, please. And I was presented this. And of course, it comes in a really, really small cup. And as I walked in, there were women on the front row. And as I walked in, they said, that's the smallest thing I've ever seen, which was not the welcome I was hoping for. But, you know.
Little off-putting as you're about to speak.
Yeah, it was really.
Wow. That's I don't really know where to go with that, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, move on.
Yeah. So, what's a book that you've read that has caused you to reconsider things?
Oh, so many. But the one that I would say changed my attitude and impression of education would be Teaching Thinking by Matthew Lipman. And Matthew Lipman is the guy who created the idea of philosophy for children.
Wow.
And I fell into teaching in a very circuitous route. And when I got to teacher training college, I was recommended this book, and it just turned my head upside down. And so if you're looking for one that has changed me, I would say that book.
Amazing. Do you have any, do you read widely outside of education, or do you tend to stick within that field?
I try to read as much outside of education as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your wife is South African. I'm reading Trevor Noah's autobiography right now, Born a Crime.
Brilliant.
And I love autobiographies. That would be my favorite.
Wow.
I try to read as much as possible. Kindle is a marvelous thing, isn't it? That you can have so many books on one device.
What are you, a bit of an aside, why is it autobiographies that you are so drawn to? Is it something about the lessons of people?
Yeah, I think so. I think I love fiction also.
Yeah.
But I think there's something about the true story, the true nature. And I find it fascinating, the obstacles people have overcome. And there's not one autobiography that I've read that doesn't include an awful lot of trauma or an awful lot of obstacles. And everybody's going through it.
Yeah.
And maybe not today, although, of course, millions are, but yesterday.
Yeah.
And tomorrow, and so we're all going through it. So it's a strong reminder.
I always find it so reassuring because, like, you sort of, in many cases, idolize these incredible people who have done amazing things, but I think you forget that within their story is such a struggle of actually getting through some really difficult things. So I find autobiographies absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. I would challenge anybody to find a successful person. And of course, I would like to put inverted commas around the word successful there, because I of course don't mean in money terms, although that might be part of it. It's much more to do with having changed the world for the better, having influenced, having been perfect or not so, maybe you can't say perfect, but a brilliant parent. You know, there's so many things. And I bet you can't find one successful person who hasn't been through a hell of a lot to get there.
Yeah. Or they're just lying and they just are not being honest.
Yeah, exactly. They're trying to make it seem so very easy.
Yeah. Your lead up to teaching has been absolutely fascinating. I mean, everything from a pig farming to working for the American Red Cross to a teaching assistant working in a school with deaf children. It's really, really interesting, your sort of eclectic move into education. Would you mind just explaining a little bit about what your upbringing was like and how you ended up where you are today?
Childhood is probably best forgotten in a lot of ways, and I try not to reflect on it too much, but I hated school. I think I probably liked primary school. I don't remember very much about it. I attended about 6 different primary schools as my father was in the Air Force. And so we moved. But I think they were generally all right. I do remember studying dinosaurs every single term. Every move to a new school, guess what we're going to learn? I mean, why I'm not a paleontologist, I'll never know. But then secondary school, my father had come out of the Air Force and we'd settled back in Yorkshire. And 2 months into secondary school life, my mother died. And so I kind of went off the rails a bit and didn't know how to respond to that. And one way, and I suppose a lot of kids do this, they act out. You know, I think it's probably the same in Oz as it is in the UK. We rally against Americanization of our language. You know, it's like, how dare they bring in, we're wearing trousers, not pants, you know, and these are trainers, not sneakers. But I think there's one phrase that I wish that we would adopt in the UK, and that is acting out. I think that's a very strong phrase that the Americans use for bad behavior. The kids are acting out. And I think that gives a lot of insight into a lot of behavior. Of course, not all of it, but I would suggest there's a substantial amount of it. And I certainly was acting out a pain, a trauma, you know. And so I got labeled as a naughty kid. And of course, once you get a label, it's pretty hard to shake the thing.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that drives me in education. I used to act out because then the teacher would notice my bad behavior. Then they would warn me about my bad behavior, and they would watch me for my bad behavior. So guess what? I was getting attention. Yeah. And then they would send me out of class because of my bad behavior. And every single time a teacher spoke to me about my bad behavior, I thought to myself, I've got you exactly where I want you, because you're not looking at my learning, or rather lack of learning. You're not looking at my lack of understanding. You're not digging into why do I not understand? Because to me, and I would guess to 90-something% of kids, it's much, much better to be thought of as naughty rather than to be thought of as stupid. And so I got sent out so many times. I got kicked out at 2 schools, and I absolutely hated school. But I loved dossing around with my mates, you know, and then did my O-levels at 16 and thought I'd just leave school. But then it turned out a whole load of my mates were staying at school. And I thought, I thought we were all going to go and bum around Europe together. And that didn't quite work out that way. And then and my father kicked me out at that point. So that's why I went and lived on a pig farm, because I had to earn some pennies somehow. Wow. And first day on a pig farm, the initiation exercise was to make sure that the prize boar put his, shall we say, his product where it was supposed to go. And that was my first day on the pig farm. It was, but I used to love standing in the pigsties, and the little piglets would nibble your legs. Best massage ever. Put a pair of wellies on, or gum boots, right, and just let piglets nibble your calves. Just immense massage. But
they will always be there'll always be wellies, by the way. I refuse to.
Okay, good man. Yeah, so, too right. I mean, gum boots. What the hell's that all about? You know.
At least you really can say Wellington boots. At least you know it.
Yes, one puts on one's Wellington boots. And
really, James, that's so fascinating. And the thing that has come up time and time again with working through your reading through your work and listening to some of your incredible presentations and talks is that focus on learning. And it's not necessarily about sort of school structures. It's not about discipline. It's not about kids that are acting up, but you really, why are you so focused on the actual learning that's happening in classrooms, and why is that so important? Because it seems as if even though, and this is just an assumption I'm making, even though you were acting up at school, even though you were kind of mucking around a bit, you still seem to have this thirst for learning and knowledge. Is that true? Do you think that's, have I ever?
Yeah, I do. I feel as if I'm making up for lost time, and that's a personal thing. But I think most of all, it's a mission.
Yeah,
being on a mission. Having left school and bummed around at different jobs, realizing I didn't really want to be a pig farmer for the rest of my days. So then I went to a chemical factory, and I thought, this is even worse, you know, and you know, you go into a chemical factory, and then it's just everybody goes down the pub straight from the factory, and you're just tanking it, and you're knocking back beer after beer after beer, and you just think this is night after night after night, and you live in almost hand to mouth. And I thought, there's got to be more to it than this. And then some mates of mine were heading down to South Africa. This was in 89, so as you'll well know, sort of 89, 90, and so the breakdown of apartheid, and Mandela was released in February 90, and so this was late 89, and they were going down to do some voluntary charity work in some of the squatter camps and townships outside of Cape Town, and I thought, well, what the hell, I'll go do that. And we worked in a women's cooperative, and we worked in a men's hostel, and then one of the things that we did was we worked in a school. And there was 500 kids in that school, and just 3 trained teachers. Wow. And I helped as best as I could, but all the time thinking to myself, I'm gaining more than the kids are gaining here. But I found sort of an affinity
Wow.
And found that I built a rapport quickly. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe teaching is something for me.
Wow.
And I came back to the UK a year later and tried to get into teacher training, but I didn't have the grades at all because I'd stuffed up at school. So then I got a job as working in a deaf school as a teaching assistant.
Wow.
And so then that was enabled me 3 years later to get into teacher training college. And throughout that, it was, we're here for the learning, aren't we?
Yeah.
Surely we're here for the learning. And there's so many distractions that drag us away from that learning. I mean, you mentioned uniforms there, and that's something that Australia and UK share. I think is pretty much every Commonwealth country. In fact, I've got this theory that if you drive on the left, then you put your kids in uniform. That's my theory right now, okay? But we seem to be, there's this distraction, and I mean, I'm sure you were the same at school. You know, if you wanted to get a rise out of the teacher, you change the way you wore your tie. You'd make it super fat or super thin, or you'd undo your top button, or you'd do something. It was something to do with uniform, and it's always been a thing for me that there's so many distractions in school and not enough emphasis on learning. And still to this day, let's say about feedback, I think there's school leaders around the world focusing way too much on checking that the teachers have given feedback. I mean, what the hell? Why are we looking to see whether teachers have given feedback? Surely what we should be looking for is what impact did it have? In other words, what did the kids learn from it? Did the kids understand it and apply it really well to improve what they were doing? Wow. And if not, well, then, so it's all about the learning, it seems to me that, and this was, I don't know, a year or two ago. I've got 3 kids and my eldest is 15 now, and her and her mates were hanging. This must have been pre-pandemic because there was like 10 of these gangly teenagers. It was like acne and limbs everywhere, and I thought I'd try and be groovy dad and hang out with these kids, as you do. And of course, I was anything but groovy. But anyway, I said to them, what do your teachers value? And they're like, what? I said, all right, well, what do your teachers care about? And to a kid, they all went, ugh, all our kids care about is what you look like. And I'm like, what? I don't know any teacher who cares about kids' looks. And they said, no, what you look like. And I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. And they said, they just can't help themselves. When they pass you in the corridor, when they see you outside, when they're waiting for something to happen, if they see you lining up, they can't help themselves. They have to mention the uniform.
Wow.
And I just thought to myself, those teachers, and I know a lot of the teachers at that school, and they're doing they're working hard and they want to do the best for their kids. But it's so much of it is undone by loose comments like uniform. Imagine if we change that to in the corridor, when was the last time you were in the learning pit? Or what's the best question you've heard today? Or what are you thinking about at the minute that's helping you to learn? Or your very first question, what is it that changed your thinking? Any question at all, any emphasis on learning. And I see we do a lot of work in Scandinavia, and of course they don't wear uniforms there. And I went to a school where they weren't allowed to wear footwear either. And this was a high school. And as I walked in, they said, can you take your shoes off? And I'm like, what? I said, yeah, nobody is allowed to wear shoes in the school. And of course, I hadn't come prepared. They'd all come prepared with big fluffy socks, but I hadn't come prepared and didn't have holes in my socks when I took my shoes off. There I was in my suit, with looking as posh as I can with holes in my socks, and I had to make a presentation. Well, actually, they probably weren't, but thanks for the... and it was the calmest, what shall we say, the calmest and most focused high school I've ever been in. Because there wasn't this clumping around, and it's really hard to be anything other than relaxed when you've got big fluffy socks on your feet. And I just thought, you know what it is? Well, and they were focused on their, and it's just, to me, let's, and I'm a fan of uniforms, don't get me wrong. I like the fact that my kids we don't have to have arguments every morning about what they're going to wear. But I think that, you know, there's too many distractions. We've got to focus on the learning so much more.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, James. I think it's fascinating. It's very hard to take yourself too seriously when you're wearing fluffy socks.
It really is, isn't it?
It's really, and I think I wonder if there's something in that, because I think uniforms are about conformity and about regulation and about predictability, and it's and I just think that school should be anything but that. And I think it's really, the uniforms don't matter. It's symbolic, I think, of a much broader thing. But it's so fascinating. I would love at some point to hear more about that, because it just seems so interesting. And you would be in such a privileged position to get to go into multiple schools, to get to work with some incredible educators and see some of the differences that are happening. I think it's fascinating. And one of my favorite stories that I've heard you told was, and I would love you to spend a few moments unpacking it. I don't want to do it a disservice or injustice by trying to paraphrase you. But it was a lesson talking about the learning pit, in which you asked your students to unpack the term tourist. And I just thought that was a really incredible story. Would you mind just spending a few moments talking about that? And obviously moving for those people that are not familiar with the learning pit, explaining what that concept is and what you saw that day in that classroom.
Of course, yeah, I'd be happy
to. It's a really lovely story.
Well, you see, the at the heart of it is we have to teach our students how to think, as well as what to think.
Absolutely.
You know, I want my kids to get good grades. Of course I do. I want them to do well in the NAPLAN tests. I want them to get good grades. But good grades are not sufficient. We also need them to be thoughtful, imaginative, creative, reasonable, collaborative, etc., etc. We need that. And so I think we have to give a reasonable amount of time, a good amount of time over in our schooling, in education generally, to teaching students how to think. And so that's one of the drivers for the learning pit. And the other driver for the learning pit is this idea that we very often get worse before we get better. That when we try something new, something different, very often we get some early success, but then we start to struggle a bit. And it's like, wow, what do we do? And a lot of kids give up at that point, particularly if they're not used to struggle. They give up. And so the learning pit is this idea that it's normal to get worse before it gets better. So hang on in there. We'll be right. Let's get in the pit together. Let's think together, collaborate together, question, challenge, support each other. And as we do that, that will help us to come out of the pit with a much greater sense of understanding.
Brilliant.
And so there are times, of course, when we find ourselves in the pit anyway. I mean, this pandemic has put us all into the pit. You know, we've all had to learn how to teach online, and even more challenging to teach in a blended way where we've got some kids in the classroom and some kids online. I mean, that's a challenge and a half. We found ourselves in the pit. Okay, so there's times when we find ourselves there. But to me, there's other times where we should practice being in the learning pit, practice struggling, so that we get more used to struggles, so that we develop more, what should we say, resources. And I mean mental and psychological and social resources for dealing with struggle. And so the learning pit is about purposefully causing struggle in students' minds.
I love that. And
so that it's almost like, physical training. We want, in PE lessons, we try to stretch them and challenge them so that they struggle, so they're more used to it. It's the same here.
I love that analogy and sorry to interrupt or jump in. I love the analogy when you talk about cognitive conflict and just how important it is to actually cause those moments of struggle.
and to do it in an environment that is safe, to do it in an environment that builds that resilience. Because I know as a dad to two small girls and as a teacher to an even bigger group of older kids, it's so easy just to jump in and fix the problems. But I loved that idea of actually just sitting back, supporting them in the pit, and actually asking some of those questions that really causes them to think. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, and I've heard people describe what you've just talked about there as the rescuers. We rescue our kids.
We want to, because it feels good. It feels like you're important. Yeah.
I know. It's just, it does, exactly right. But when we teach kids how to ride a bicycle, for example, when they wobble, we don't run alongside them, grab hold of the bike to stop them wobbling. We encourage them to keep going until they get it. And that's the approach I think we should be taking here. Encourage them, don't stop them wobbling, encouraging them to keep going. And so the story you mentioned there about the tourism, that's an example of me trying purposely to get the kids into the learning pit by asking questions. And I've thought to myself, they've probably got a fairly surface level idea of what tourism is. And what I want to do is get them into a position where they're thinking, wow, it's a lot more complicated than we suspected. And I wanted them to make connections. So I said, what are you studying at the moment? Because I didn't know the class at all. I dropped in and did a demo. And I think that's one of the important aspects of what consultancy should be about is, look, give me a class of kids and I'll work with them. You watch their learning and then we'll talk about it afterwards. So it gives the teacher the opportunity to, for once, to sit back and watch their students with others and to focus on the students' learning rather than what they are teaching. So anyway, and I said to the students, what are you studying? And they said, tourism. And I said, and so all I said was, so what's that then? And of course, they're looking at me as if to say, well, why the hell don't you know what a tourist is? Yeah. So it says a tourist is someone who visits another place. So what I did then, and this is a very, shall we say, common technique that I would use to get students in the pit, is take whatever they say and turn it round and look for an example in which it wouldn't work. So they said a tourist is someone who visits another place. So I'm thinking to myself, can I think of an example where somebody might visit another place, but not be called a tourist? So that's the thought going through my head. And so I said, so I'm a tourist then, am I? I'm visiting your school. I've never been to your school before. Does that make me a tourist? And one of them pipes up, no, you have to be having fun. I said, well, I am having fun. And you could hear one of them say, well, he's weird, isn't he? And said, so if you visit somewhere and have fun, does that make you a tourist? And they said, well, yeah. I said, so if you visit somewhere and you don't have fun, does that mean you're not a tourist? And they said, well, no, you don't have to have fun. Okay, so do you have to visit? Could you be a tourist in your own city? You're in Sydney, so if you took a group of kids into Sydney and saw some of the sights, would you class those kids as tourists? Would they think of themselves as tourists? If they, let's say, I don't know, they go across to the zoo, right? And they're at the zoo. Are those kids tourists if they live in the suburbs of Sydney?
I would argue not.
But why not?
But I also love being a tourist in my own city. So that is a whole nother discussion. Like, I feel like one of the things I love doing in holidays, and we haven't obviously done it so much because Sydney is currently locked down, is going and visiting Sydney and pretending I'm a tourist and discovering all these new and wonderful things. So,
why do you have to pretend to be a tourist to do that?
I'm in the pit now. I don't know, to be honest. I think that tourism, I feel like tourism is somewhere where you go for a short period of time that is not your home. I feel like I'm one of those kids in the class now. This is wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So just tell me, when you say a short period of time, how short is, or rather, at what point does it stop being tourism?
That's a great question. I think when you're there longer term, you live there. So I think maybe 2 weeks. I don't know.
So if you go on holiday to Bali for 3 weeks, are you only a tourist for the first 2 weeks?
Maybe it's as long as my boss will allow me to have off work.
Okay, well, teachers, they have all these long holidays, 13 weeks holiday so you're a tourist for 13 weeks a year.
Is tourism this is great, because do you know what I can feel now though, James, I can feel that struggle in my response, which I think is really important, which actually feels like quite a unusual and foreign thing, because I'm usually on the other side of asking those questions with kids. And so it's really great. So I actually don't know. I think my definition of a tourist has been changed, and I need to try and work it out. So I appreciate that.
And I think it's important that, I know this is a podcast, but if people could see us, they'd see the smiles. Yes, both of us are smiling at this and maybe quietly laughing as well. It's very, very, very important that we're playful with this. This is not point scoring. I'm not trying to prove you wrong.
Yes.
And sometimes it's important to say that to kids. Hopefully it's implicit, but often we have to say that, this is not about point scoring. My purpose here is to get you to think more.
Yeah.
That's it. And some kids will turn around and say, well, you tell us what a tourist is.
Yeah.
I say, well, to be honest, listening right now, I'm not very sure what a tourist is.
Yeah.
And yet we're studying tourism. And we're studying tourist numbers and how important tourism is to Sydney or New South Wales or to Australia generally. I mean, it's fascinating. We can look up tourist visitor numbers. We can look up the amount of money made from tourism for each country.
But we can't.
So exactly, but we can't define tourism. And it's just trying to get people to think more. And if we can pick concepts like tourism that are in the curriculum, so there's no naysayers able to point out that we're not doing the curriculum anymore, because we are. But I'm trying to get them in the pit to think more, because what I would love is for you and all your mates to head out of the classroom and argue about tourism, and to talk about it when you get home, and to look it up, to try to show me what a tourist is. And that's a big part of this. And it's about that learning. That there was, this is years and years and years ago, but somebody had said, I was an attendee at a conference, and the speaker was challenging the very notion that teachers have got even the most significant role in a kid's education, because she said, just think about the amount of time kids spend in school. So this was in a UK context, and typically our schools, you're in school for 6 hours a day, so 9 till 3 or 3:30, something like that. But out of that time, you generally have 5 lots of 1 hour lessons. So they've got 25 hours of lessons per week. The school holidays last 13 weeks by the time you got your summer, your Easter, your Christmas, and then your half terms and so on. And then there's also 5 days worth of school closures for teacher training. So in effect, the kids have 14 weeks. So that, of course, leaves them 38 weeks in school. And if you do 38 weeks times 25 hours, and then you compare that to the number of waking hours in a year. So let's hope that they'll be asleep 10 hours a night. So they've got 14. Do you see where I was going with this? And so they're saying, right, how many waking hours do kids have? And how many hours of lessons do the kids have? And now what's the proportion? And I worked it out to be 20%. 20% of their waking hours in lessons. Now, of course, we can argue that it's not just in lessons that you're learning, and that then leads to this. If we can use lessons to provoke thinking such that the kids take it out of the classroom, take it home, take it into the playground, take it on their walk home, it gets them thinking more. And if we can, that would be one way to go, is let's increase the amount of time kids are thinking about their learning.
Yeah. There's so much in that, James. I mean, it's fascinating. I can see your, it's obviously an audio recording, but I can see your passion when you begin to start to talk about learning. It's really wonderful. And how important do you think it is? Sorry, let me maybe ask a question. What do you think then the role of the teacher is becoming? I mean, it's obviously not just a holder of knowledge. I mean, Google knows way more than I could. So what do you think the role of the teacher currently is? And do you feel like where do you think that's moving to in the future? Or has it always been the same?
Yeah, there's Siddhartha Mitra, who, okay, so you're nodding, you know his name, and his perhaps most famous experiment was called the hole in the wall experiment, where he put computers in walls on the outskirts of slums in Delhi and said to the kids, there's those computers, go play with them whenever you want. But they also got a random group of kids from the same slums and took them to classrooms and taught them how to use computers. And they compared them before and compared them after. And guess what? The kids who had been left to play made a lot more progress because they were learning from each other. And there was this self-organized learning hubs, as he called them. And it was, Siddhartha Mitra says that a teacher who can be replaced by a machine should be. And I thought, oh, thanks very much, Siddhartha. That's good of you to say. But notice he doesn't say all teachers should be replaced.
Yeah.
He's saying the teachers who can be replaced by machines should be. And what he's saying there is that if the majority of what we're doing is giving kids information, well, as you said, Google can do that. Machines can do that. What you and I can't be replaced with, I don't think, is in helping the kids to make connections to their lives, to spot relevance, to connect across the curriculum, to ask those questions with a purpose of getting them into the learning pit. In other words, the machines, in inverted commas, can help and probably do as good a job because of their budget. They can do as good a job with the surface level knowledge, but what they can't replace us with is the deep understanding. And by deep understanding, I mean moving from knowledge to understanding, moving from having lots of information to connecting it, to sequencing it, to grouping it, to ranking it, to identifying what's relevant and what's not, to connecting it then and making sense of the world based on all the other things, and then using it, applying it, and adjusting it, creating new things.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, the solo taxonomy is a really nice way of describing that. Solo taxonomy has that pre-structural, unistructural, and multistructural level, and those are knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. You move from knowing nothing to knowing some things to knowing lots of things. Far too often in our curricula around the world, we stop there. Once the kids know the topic, too often then we move to the next topic.
Yeah.
But what we've covered there is surface, and we need surface.
Yes.
This is not an either or. You have to have surface before you can go deep. But back to the solo taxonomy, the next two levels are that relational stage, in other words, connecting, and at the heart of understanding is connecting, and then the abstract application. So it's taking the knowledge, working out what it means, and connecting it into how we understand the world, and maybe adjusting the world, as we did when we talked about tourists, and then looking for, well, what can we do now to adjust that for another purpose?
Yeah.
And you mentioned John Hattie before. He and I have worked together many, many, many times. And one thing that I hear him say loud and clear again and again and again, it's not either surface or deep. It's not even surface and deep. It's about surface at the right time, deep at the right time. And teachers are the best at knowing when is the right time to move from surface to deep.
Yeah.
And so the machines, in inverted commas, can provide information to help kids get that surface level knowledge. But what they can't do, and where we are irreplaceable, I would say, is in helping them to get deep learning, to connect it to their lives and make sense of it so that they can enrich their lives and lead to new and different, and one would hope better thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, James. It's so, I feel like I'm getting goosebumps hearing you speak, because I want to get back into my class and start teaching them some of these things. And it's really, really, really exciting. And like, we know what we need to do as educators. We know that we need to be connecting meaningfully with our students. We know we need to be designing these incredibly rich learning environments and building that surface knowledge with them, and also building that deeper understanding. But why is this stuff so hard to do in a really structured school learning environment? Like,
I think there's many. I think tradition has something to do with it. I think there's so many teachers in education who succeeded at school. Yeah. So, why change it? It worked for me. I think it's also down to history, where education has come from, because of course, and I'm talking Western education here, because of course, First Nation education is a whole lot different and based on stories. But if we talk Western education here, then it began with learn the holy book, learn the scriptures or the Quran or whatever religion, but, learn the scriptures. And then in the Industrial Revolution in the Western world, there was this idea that maybe we need to educate more than just the richest kids. And so then Education Acts popped up left, right, and center, including in Australia. And there was this idea that, well, we've got to help the kids. We've got to work out which kids are clever and which ones are not, which ones are going to go into the factory and which ones are going to run the factory, And so, well, how do we work that out? Well, testing's a good way to work that out. And so we'll teach them information and then we'll test it. And then whoever does well, they're the clever ones and they can wear a white collar throughout their adulthood, and those who don't do very well, they can wear a blue collar, and do manual work. And we're still stuck with that, in so many ways. And you think to yourself, well, why? But tradition, and we've always done it this way, is a really, really, really hard thing to shift. I think another problem is that some of the new whizzy-bangy bandwagon glitzy things that have come along have been sold to us almost like snake oil. It's like, forget everything, do this instead. And it's like, well, actually, we do need to be literate, and we do need to be numerate, and we do need to get good grades. So what are you talking about? That it's all about multiple intelligences, and it's all about doing brain gym in the classroom. And of course, educators, we just, there's so much going on that you just think, help. Where do we go from this? And so I think we have to be careful we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't stop teaching them to read and write and times tables and all those sorts of things. But what I think we have to think of is, what else do we need to do here? What else do we need to prepare them for? And how are we going to do that? So there's simple things. I mean, student voice. I'm a massive, massive fan of student voice. I'm sure you are too. I mean, you can learn so much by just listening to your students. And that's one of the things we do in our team, is we visit schools and we do the student voice, because we find that students will often speak to us, the outsiders, perhaps more honestly. And what we do is we say, look, we're going to audio record this, and then we'll transcribe it, and your teachers will get a transcript. But we'll remove any name that's mentioned. So any teacher's name, any child's name will be removed, and it'll just be what you're saying. And it's fascinating. And I was doing this with a group of kids here, and I said, well, what helps you with learning? And they mentioned one or two things. And then this kid who'd recently arrived from South Korea says, well, I always look ahead to see what's coming next, and I learn that before the lesson. And the Scottish kids are like, what? you're not allowed to do that. That's cheating. And this poor Korean kid's going, thinking, oh my God, I've caused some cultural incident here. And he says, why is it cheating? And they said, well, you're not allowed to look ahead. And so I said, of course, well, why aren't you allowed to look ahead? So then they thought, oh, we don't have a good answer for that. But then they says, but how do you know? And he says, well, you're just looking like, if I'm thinking maths and they've just been teaching percentages, there's a good chance now they're going to be doing fractions because they're kind of the same thing, aren't they? So I just learned fractions before the lesson.
Yeah.
And one of the kids said, is that why you're so clever? And the kid said, well, I don't know, but it helps me.
Brilliant.
And I said to everyone, well, would that help everyone? And they said, well, yeah. So then what we did was what we call preview. And it's just every homework that we gave, and we didn't add any more homework. It's just we took the homework that was already given and we adjusted it so that it became preview rather than review.
Amazing.
So next week, we're going to be studying percentages, or we're going to be looking at the Viking invasion of Britain, or we're going to be looking at, and whatever it is. And choose wisely. Don't say next week we're going to be doing long division, so go and ask your granddad how to do long division. You don't go for the things that you know is going to be a complete and utter nightmare. You go for the stuff that you think is going to help them. And then that's the homework. And then the following week, it's a win-win because you don't have to mark anything. Because what you're doing is you start with, so what did you find out in the in your homework? Let's hear what you found out and let's see how we can use that. Right. And you adjust it and correct it there and then. But what they're doing is just moving one level on in that, I talked about that solo taxonomy. And so the kids who knew nothing, now by the time the lesson begins, they know a little bit. And the kids who already knew a little bit, they know quite a lot more. But I've actually heard teachers say, well, won't that spoil the surprise? I'm thinking, if surprise is the main part of your pedagogy, you might want to expand your toolkit just a little bit. This is not about giving away the state secrets. It's, heaven forbid, give the kids the opportunity to prepare. And if I might rob a little bit more time and connect it back to, you asked me at the beginning, my childhood story. I have lost count of the literally hundreds of hours I spent on detention. And I can still repeat to you now, Indiana pink, why, what a lie. It ain't no lie. I've seen it on the map and it's pink. Why can I repeat that? Because I've literally written that tens of thousands of times because detention was... they called it in one of the schools I was at statements, and statements was a list of statements, like utterly ridiculous things like that quote that I've just given you, and you just had to copy it down. And it would always start at 50, right? 50 statements if you messed around, and if you messed around a bit more, right? 100 statements. And that was your detention. You had to write this damn thing out. It's like, Bart Simpson on the blackboard writing out. And imagine if we changed every detention to preview. So if you put a child on detention, what you need to do is you say, right, this child, you're on detention, and this is what we're studying next week. So I want you to do research on that. So go and find out about tourism, or go and find out about, and I want you to write down some notes about what you found out ready for next week. And so many kids, myself included, they act out because they don't know what's going on otherwise. They're not doing very well. They don't understand it. Give me preview. I could have used that detention to actually get ahead, to actually give me the opportunity to connect and get involved in the lesson.
Amazing. And it's so that's so interesting because I think we want to empower students to be able to succeed as opposed to catch them when they do the wrong thing or to make them feel inadequate when they don't know the answer. But if they knew the answer, then why am I here? It's really interesting to hear that. And I think it's fascinating, James. And I have so many questions. And at some point we would love to do a round two because there's just, I think your work is so, the breadth of your work is so impressive. But also I think what's so lovely hearing you speak is hearing the heart behind the messages that you're presenting and talking about. It's so wonderful. And I know that I feel like your experience in school, even though it was incredibly challenging and traumatic, it's great to see how you're using something like that to really benefit a new generation of students and teachers. It's really lovely to see how you can turn something which is so awful into something which helps other people. So it's really incredible to see. James, just a couple of questions. 10 books. Where on earth do you find the time to write 10 books?
You know what? I've asked myself
that's crazy. That's amazing.
Like questions just like, what the hell?
Yeah.
One thing I've learned from lockdown is how to slow down.
Yeah.
And how to rest. And I asked that we start this at 11:30 this morning because I go swimming 5 times a week now. And so I drop the kids off at school and then I go for a swim. And I didn't want to sit here a hot, sweaty mess. So I need time to cool down as well. And so I've learned to do that. And so I often think back to how in the hell did I find the time to write 10 books? But you've seen me and speak now, and I'm just so really passionate. I think we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
These are little tweaks, what I would say are relatively minor changes that can make a really big difference.
Yeah.
And I think I am in a fabulously privileged position here because I get to go to so many different countries in so many different schools and see so much fabulous stuff that I think I've got to share that.
Yeah.
If I wish that I'd heard that I wish my teachers had heard that, and I wish I'd heard it when I was full-time teaching, because it's not about working harder. It's about working smarter.
Yeah.
And just getting, in fact, stood in the queue for the swimming this morning and this woman says, so what do you do then? Are you some motivational speaker? And I hate that term, because it just gives the idea is like hallelujah and wave your hands and so on. But I said, no, it's more about just looking at what's the research and what's the best practice saying about what we can do to adjust things in our teaching that can have a really big difference on children's learning. And she says, well, like what? So I says, well, take, for example, feedback. If you said to me, I'm applying for a new job and I've written the first draft of my application, what do you reckon? Compare that to you saying, I'm applying for a new job. I've spent all weekend on this application. I reckon it's the best it can be. I'm about to send it. Will you take a look?
Yeah.
Now, compare those two situations. As the person being asked to give feedback, which one are you more likely to give honest feedback? And which one are you likely to say, yeah, very good. That's lovely.
Yeah, that's true.
And the person asking for that feedback, which one are you more likely to be open to it and use that advice? And which one are you just tell me it's good?
Yeah.
And I think so much feedback, particularly marking, is given after students have finished their work. And it's like, well, what the hell? Why are we giving it then?
Or it's like,
and people say, oh, yes, but they're going to do it again next time. They say, yeah, but if you want them to do the best job now, and when you ask me the question, what's the role of the teacher? That would be something I would say in connection with feedback. Our role is as the coach, not the referee. We're the coach. We should be there on the sidelines, challenging them, urging them on, encouraging them, changing the tactics, helping them to improve, having the halftime team talk. We're not the referee who just blows the whistle every time they do something wrong, unless they're taking their national tests. If they're taking NAPLAN, well, fair enough, you're the referee. But the rest of the time, we're the coach. So it's those kind of things, Matthew, that it's just about adjusting things. What can we find that will improve what we do, and really importantly, help students to learn more? And when I say more, I don't necessarily mean quantifiable, but quality and through social and emotional reasons as well. So it's improved their learning, let's call it that.
Yeah, well, James, that's amazing. And like I said, to hear you speak with such conviction and confidence is it's so refreshing. Like I said, I do want to be respectful of your time. So just two more brief questions. The first one, what would you say to a student that's sitting in a classroom now feeling disengaged, feeling like they don't belong in a school? What would you say to that student? Think about what you would have liked to hear when you were a boy from your teacher, or what advice would you give to that person?
I think it would be much more about, I would ask the question, what's going on? Yeah.
Take the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Listening. I think, the student voice is so massive. I ended up in intensive care in the late 90s, and they did test after test after test.
Yeah.
I was like a pincushion. I had MRIs, I had the works. Not once ever did anyone say, what's going on in your life?
Wow.
And it was entirely a psychological thing.
Gosh.
But that was never, ever, ever even considered. It was just, they did more tests than I care to remember.
Gosh.
And so what's going on, I think is, and I don't mean that in a confrontational, challenging, what the hell are you doing kind of way.
Yeah.
I mean, in a very open, what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important. I think taking that time to listen, I love your analogy of the role of the teacher is not one of a referee, but it's one of a coach. And I think taking the time to ask those questions and to say, how can I help you? I'm here to support you.
Indeed.
You're a champion. And I think it's really wonderful, James, to finally get to have a chat. And I've been such a fan of your work for so long, and your passion and your conviction for the work that you're doing and for the lives of students that you're changing all over the world is really, really inspiring. So please write another 10 books. I'll buy them.
Thanks.
But I don't know where you'll find the time. Maybe you might have to swim 4 days. I don't know where you'll find the time.
Maybe.
Yeah, but for those people that would like to find out more about your work, where can they find out more about you?
The best place would be our team website. That's challenginglearning.com.
Fantastic.
And that was the name of my first book as well, Challenging Learning.
Yeah.
And I chose that name because I think we need to challenge the way in which learning takes place. Yeah. And I think we need to make learning more challenging.
Yeah.
And by challenging, I mean engaging. So, but anyway, challenginglearning.com.
Great. And I'll put all your resources and everything in the show notes on the podcast. But
Thanks.
I'm incredibly grateful for this conversation, and I really do hope, and I know that so many teachers around the world will find hope in your message and also be inspired by your work. So keep it up.
Thank you
so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for the invite, and thanks for not mentioning the football the other day when England got beat by Italy. So thank you. That was very good of you.
No problem. Thank you so much, James. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Art of Teaching podcast today. I hope that you, like me, got some valuable insights out of our discussion. For show notes, please visit theartofteachingpodcast.com. I've one favour to ask. If you could please head to the iTunes page of the podcast and rate and review the episode. This would really help to get the interviews and resources to as many people as possible. Also, I've created a private Facebook group so that we can continue the discussion after each episode. The link is in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and until next time.